Good afternoon and welcome everybody to August's staff chat. My name is Priscilla Andrews. I'm the clinical manager here at the Cancer Wellness Center. For those of you who are new to the series, welcome. The series was created as a way to give our participant community insight into conversations between two professionals on a topic of interest to the cancer community. And I am very excited to have with me today Anita Jenke. Anita, thanks for being here. And Anita is executive director, am I getting the title right? With the Career Transition Center of Chicago. Is that right? I always call it the CTCC, and I was saying in my mind, I was like, Priscilla, don't mess this up. Don't mess this up. So Anita, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, well, and I find so much when I have clients, and I know my colleagues that have clients that are either working while having a cancer diagnosis or returning to work. There's so many concerns that come up around work and work-life balance. So I'm really excited to have a professional here, somebody who works in that venue to be able to talk about this today. I always like to ask people when I'm sitting down with them, because maybe it's my own personal curiosity of kind of what drew you to the area of careers and working with people that are kind of hoping to make transitions in their work life.
Sure. So I've always had a strong commitment to social and economic justice. I began my career as a journalist and moved into the nonprofit sector as a more direct way to impact people's lives. And I've spent most of my career working in either workforce development or in addiction services in operations and fundraising.
Wow.
Yeah, I enjoy helping people identify and accomplish their goals, as particularly around careers, because it's such an integral part of our identity in the society.
For sure. For sure. And I will say, I think that is one of the things that I've always appreciated about the CTCC and what I know about them is that benefit of structure and having there be goals when you're trying to make transitions around career. Because the things that when I talk to people, it's a little bit more amorphous than that, I think. So I'm hopeful that people will take away some thoughts about if they're struggling with where to get started and how to get started with stuff that's related to careers, that this will give them some guidance, kind of a little bit of a roadmap.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So if I can launch us off here, I kind of want to get your thoughts on what I think is one of the most common things that I encounter here, which is people who have been diagnosed with cancer, they're returning to work. I will acknowledge, I think a lot of the people that I see here have, the benefit of having been able to maybe apply for FMLA, or they had paid time off or short-term disability. A lot of the people that I see work in a professional white-collar job. So I do want to give voice to that, because I think there's the whole issue of people who work in blue-collar fields where they're really having to push and work while in treatment, right? But for those people who are returning to work, there is this increased value placed on work-life value. There is some directives that they can get from their healthcare providers about stress management, improved quality of sleep, that don't fit into the lifestyle that they had pre-cancer relative to work. Those people who, they have a 40-hour job, but they're working 45, 50, 60 hours a week. And so people come to me and they're saying, I want to do something different. I want to have that better work-life balance. Maybe also I'm finding my work is not as fulfilling. I've kind of had this glimpse into mortality and I want to do something more meaningful, but they just are like, I don't know where to start. I still have to keep working. You know, where do people even begin if they're taking a look, they're stepping back and taking a look to say, I want to do something different?
Sure. Well, what I would say is you're in good company. 75% of our clients are engaged in job search or career change because they want that better work-life balance. They
Mm,
realize often as a consequence of the pandemic that they were working more hours than they felt comfortable. They felt that they weren't doing justice to their health or their families. And that is a big driver for why people often come to us. We're a nonprofit organization. We provide career coaching, programming to support people in finding meaningful work. And I think when you start out thinking about making a change in your career or your job, I think one of the things you've got to do first is think about the job search as a process. And we break it into discovery, planning, and action. So on a practical level, what that means is when you're in discovery, you're in career exploration. So you've already established that you don't want to, maybe your job involves 25, 40% travel, and you don't physically think you can do it, or you don't want to do it. Both are
mhm.
valid. So you need to think about what are the skills and the accomplishments you've got that you could leverage and use in a different way, in a different career path, in a different industry. And I think taking stock of yourself, looking at your resume, what have you accomplished? What are your credentials? What are some things that you'd like to do? Maybe looking at the things you do now and really zeroing in on, like, rather than being the director of communications and doing everything, maybe looking at only doing one, looking for a job where you could focus in on media relations.
Mm,
I'm expected to do newsletters, social media, that maybe you could strike a better balance by focusing like that. Then I think the next thing you need to think about is, so I've identified a couple of jobs that sound compelling to me, but I need to make sure that it's what I think, what I'm expecting. And I think the best thing to do is to talk to someone who's doing those kinds of
mm,
jobs.
mhm, mhm.
Get a sense of a day in the life, how your skills transfer, are your expectations around more meaningful work and work-life balance, is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah,
I think those are the kinds of things that you can do initially. And then once you've got a better sense of, okay, indeed, there are jobs where I could say work at a nonprofit and do media relations and not have to do media relations and social media and newsletters and publications. Then I think it's time to start looking at the planning aspect, revising and updating your resume, your LinkedIn, your cover letters, and really developing a brand statement that positions you to look for a new role in a new
mm,
sector. And at that point, then you can start thinking about the action phase, which is applying for jobs and interviewing. Throughout this whole process, you need to be networking and talking with people. You're networking for information, and you're networking to find job leads, just doing different types of networking. And that's where I think a job or career coach could come in handy, because it'll help you go about what seems like a messy process in a more deliberate, structured way. And you'll have
yeah,
somebody to talk with, touch base with, problem solve with, that kind of thing.
yeah. Well, and what I really appreciate about what you're saying is I think it sort of like slows people down, because I think a lot of times what I encounter are people who are like, they're skipping over the discovery phase and
Mhm.
they're looking at their resume. And I love that idea of it's almost like you don't want to get typecast, right?
Mhm.
Like just because this has been your title in your role before. And if you love that role and you love your title, great. But if you're wanting to do something different, how to break down what goes into your role into component parts. And I hear there being this step of, can I break down what are my skills? Like, what do I know how to do? And then, I mean, maybe even it occurs to me, like maybe even rank ordering, like in order of what do I like to do?
Yes.
Um, Paired with, I can think of I can think of a client I had who really wanted to like help people, and she just didn't find her work was really meaningful. And so she just landed on this notion of, I'm going to be a nurse. I want to be a nurse. I'm going to go back to school to be a nurse. She did not have a background in nursing.
Okay.
And it was sort of like, do you know what's involved in that? Like, do you have friends that are nurses? No, but I think, like, I think I would really like it. And I think with any job, and I'll say this even for the career path I'm in, until you're really in it, you don't really know all the ins and outs of it. You kind of have a notion of it, and sometimes an idealized notion of it.
Yes.
I mean, I'm curious if you find that happens, that like when people are in that discovery phase, are there times when people have a notion of something they think they may want to do, that then when they get more information, they're like, oh, I didn't realize that that's what that field was like, or I didn't realize that's what that work environment was like.
Yes. Yeah, I think when we want to make a change, we can idealize another path and not always think in a practical terms what it's going to take to get there. That's why I think it's invaluable to talk with people about a day in the life. What is it really like to be a nurse?
Mhm.
Do you realize how physical the job is? Do you
Mm.
realize shift work? It's very physically and mentally demanding. It draws upon, your skills of empathy, as well as you have to have a solid background in math and in science. It's very hierarchical in a hospital. Do you work well in a really
Yeah,
structured environment? Or are you somebody who does better as a solo contributor versus a team member? These are the kinds of things like, what's your work style? What do you prefer?
yeah,
Um, and I also, again, are you willing to go back to school and hit the restart button? And it's not
yeah.
just going back to nursing school. If you didn't have enough science as an undergrad, they often make you take those science classes to bolster up before you can enter nursing school.
Yeah.
Thinking about, is this something I'd like to do? But you have to really understand what you're getting into. It's invaluable to talk to people. In some cases, not necessarily in nursing, there are returnships. So, for example, let's say you're thinking that you've been out of the workforce for a couple of years, and you're thinking, I think I might want to go into, digital marketing.
Mm.
Some companies are open to internships for college grads and returnships for professionals who are
Mm.
testing out a new career, or maybe doing volunteer work where you could actually get some hands-on experience. Do you really want to be like a social media manager? See if you're a nonprofit you're involved with, a faith community, a small business, you know, could you get involved and doing some of this, you get some hands-on experience to see if you really like it or not. Volunteer work can also help with discernment.
I'm curious because this is, that notion of the benefit of doing legwork, right? Because if you do the legwork to know this information, then you're going to be better positioned to redesign your resume directed at the industry or the jobs you want. You're going to be better positioned to know where you even want to apply, where it's going to be a good fit. That I think going along with the legwork, it does make me think about people that, I want to do something different, but I carry the insurance. And I think that's a big driver for people, is like they kind of feel stuck because they are, especially with a cancer diagnosis, feeling reliant on that. And
Mhm.
and I'm curious, like, if somebody is needing to fit in this effort, this sort of discovery phase
Mhm.
into working a full-time job, like what do you see as kind of the baby steps? Like we're going to eat the elephant one bite at a time. That's like my new like
Yes.
little favorite thing to say. Like
Mhm.
what are the bites that you recommend as the first moves?
Okay, so let me tell you about a client we had during the pandemic. She had worked in the travel industry, and of course, during the pandemic, that industry basically collapsed, and she was laid off. And she right about that time was diagnosed with cancer. So she
Mm.
decided the first strategy was to look for a survival job. So she got a job at, like a delivery service like UPS, FedEx, that gave her the hours she needed, at least a basic survival income and
Mm.
insurance. So you have to think about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. She needed to secure income and insurance as quickly as possible while
Yeah.
continuing to consider what would her career look like in the long term. And what she concluded is that much as she liked the travel industry, it was going to have a few more challenging years. So she looked at the skills that she had and realized that she could be a project manager. If you think about doing corporate travel, if you think about planning a trip, it is a series of it's like project management. You have
Yeah.
to figure out the needs, what are the key elements, and putting a plan together. And so the decision was to pivot towards project management, which is also something that can be done virtually and in an in-person office. So
Yeah.
I thought that approach was good and logical. She understood and took stock of what her skills were. She took care of her immediate financial and insurance needs while giving some deep thought to what are my skills going to transfer to. And there are also, if you're unemployed, there are things like the WIOA vouchers that allow you to get upskilled and retrained. And in her case, project management certification made sense.
Mm.
And then that pivots you and positions you for that next career. And it pulls from the skills that you developed in your earlier career. Does that sound?
Yeah. Well, and I think that piece of what comes to mind for me is I think how valuable like the services that the CTCC provides are. And if that's maybe too big of a reach for somebody, the value of having somebody as
Yes.
an advisor to get
Yeah.
a fresh set of eyes, because I could easily see the person who always worked in travel, for instance, saying, well, I worked in travel, and not thinking about what they were doing in that novel way of saying, well, really what you were doing was project management, even if that's not what it was being called.
Correct.
So if you like doing that, this might be like to make that connection of
Yes.
if you enjoyed this other thing that maybe you wouldn't even think about, right?
Hmm.
Because I think sometimes people can either be very focused on their skill, right? Like I'm a therapist, so that's my skill base, but they could also be very focused on the industry that they're in, right? Like I work with cancer patients or I work in travel, that
Yes.
could limit their sense of what they could do if they're wanting to make a big pivot in their life.
Yeah. And
Does
I
that
think
make sense?
it does. And that's why I think a career coach can be helpful because, they have no agenda. They're not wedded to you doing a specific something. And I think they can take like almost like an x-ray look and help you think through. Well, in thinking about your career, it sounds to me like two things that strike me would be you're doing project management. That's a highly valued skill.
Mhm.
You're used to managing, like finding out what a client's needs are, designing and then executing on it and managing those details. And you're bringing in hotels and tour groups, you're bringing in, airlines, and you're troubleshooting throughout until the end of the project. On
Yeah.
the other hand, you could also look at customer service and satisfaction. A lot of firms are looking for people with very high customer service skills, like at investment management firms, at health insurance companies. They're looking for people with high emotional intelligence and can think well and act under pressure. Travel is one of those. And I would say that being able to work with people while they're in a panic in Europe and their flight's been canceled qualifies you for someone who can work well with people under pressure. You could looking at health insurance companies and working in customer service.
Yeah.
So I think having a coach who can like step away from the specifics and look at that bigger picture and help you think out of the box about how the skills transfer if you determine that you aren't interested in continuing in the field that you're in. And right now, a lot of people are very interested in remote or at least hybrid work. So what careers would furthermore be compatible with that?
Mm.
And both of those indeed could.
Well, and that bringing in the like combination of um, what you're interested in, what skills you have, and then that kind of work style,
Mhm.
work environment piece. Um, and I think that the notion, I'm like, geez, I want one, I want to just go to a coach because it just sounds like having your own personal cheerleader of like, look at all these
Right.
things that you're good at. Um, I think the notion of making some investment up front
Yeah.
where you're maybe not in that action phase of sending out the resumes, but putting in that time investment so that when you do get to that place, that phase, you've got a really solid base that you're working from.
Yeah. And I think it's the way you make a successful transition is you have to talk to lots of people. You have to network. You have to do research. There are websites that are very helpful, like ONET Online. It's the Federal Department of Labor website where you can look up about different careers, career paths. It'll tell you about demand by job and industry sector. It'll tell you about average wages by state and nationally. I think it's really important that you do your research. Also, Indeed and LinkedIn, I'm seeing some interesting and compelling new trends. More and more employers are listing salary ranges in
Mm-hmm.
those positions. One, because there's some new legislation that's been passed in, let's see, Michigan, New York, and California. And I think there's some legislation pending in Chicago, in Illinois, that requires employers to provide us a salary or a salary range.
Yeah.
And that's really helpful. So if you can then begin to do some research to figure out, all right, so I want to shift to project management. I was getting commissions as a salesperson. My salary was X. What would that look like in a non-commissioned position where I would have a higher salary? Is it
Yeah.
you know, and you can find this out by doing some research very easily, Glassdoor, salary.com, LinkedIn, Indeed,
Yeah.
and just talking to people in the industry. I think you have to make this upfront investment in time and research to have a satisfying and successful career transition. And having a coach that can guide you, probe, suggest ideas, questions, and maybe push you a tiny bit out of your comfort zone to try things or talk to people maybe you
Mm.
feel uncomfortable with. They're not going to make you do anything like radical, but I know they might say, think about people you worked with in the past who you've had a good relationship with. Ask to speak with them, find out where they're at, see if they can, ask them, and having worked with me for 5 years, what, I'm trying to discern my next career step. What do you think from working with me you see as some of my strengths? Sometimes
Yeah.
getting almost like a 360 feedback can be really helpful too.
Well, and I will say from being on the receiving end of that sometimes here, just as a little insight, like we've had like, we have a training program. So we are lucky to have really good relationships with our past students and people that just stay in touch with us and like will check in, maybe not with me, but like with our clinical director. And I could see that be feeling maybe a little intimidating, but like if you had a good experience with that person, or we had
Yes.
that good experience with that person, like we're excited to talk to them. Like if we can't help them ourselves because we're not hiring, like we want to
Yes.
assist in that process. I mean, I think we can kind of underestimate the human resources that we have if we have those relationships and how what would I say? Complimentary, like there's a word I want to use, I can't think of it, but like, oh, you want to talk to me? Okay, well,
Yeah.
that feels good to know that somebody would think of you in that
Yes.
way.
Absolutely. People tend to be flattered if they say,
Flattered, that's the
hey,
word. Thank you, Anita.
I'd like to do an informational interview, like learn about your career, get a sense of how you ended up in your current role, because it very much aligns with where I see myself going. And I'd
Yeah.
like to see what you did that made a difference and helped you accomplish your goals. People like to talk about themselves. Yeah, absolutely. And
I
I think when you think about networking, it has to be a little bit of an act of faith that you believe in the goodness of people, that they want to help.
yeah.
And I think the more explicit you are in telling them what you'd like, to learn, the more likely they are to say yes. If you're like, I'm out of work and I really need help finding a job, that's very off-putting. That is just a hard no, don't do that, because that almost pushes the burden of responsibility onto the other person where they feel like, oh, I gotta find them a job, versus I'm looking for information, I'm contemplating a career change. And I think by talking to you, I'll get some insights as to whether this direction makes sense for me.
Yeah. Well,
There's no pressure.
what I want to tie this to here is, I think the notion of pivoting to a different career, or maybe you're out of work, right?
Mhm.
You can feel really self-conscious about that, or feel anxious about it, and you can get in your own head about it, which
Yeah.
could then make it feel very nerve-wracking to do what you're suggesting, which on the other side of the table, if somebody came to me and said, hey, I'm interested in being a therapist at a nonprofit and I want to find out more about what you do, I'm going to have absolutely no negative judgment of that person, right? I'm going to be very interested in talking to them. And what I want to marry that with is, I think sometimes the pivot takes place because of the diagnosis, right? Maybe somebody was maybe out of work before they were diagnosed, and then they had to focus on their treatment.
Yes.
Or they were downsized during their diagnosis, or they were caregiving for somebody and they're needing to like re-enter the job market. Regardless of the reason, I think people get worried about how that gap in their employment history is going to be viewed. Am I going to have to explain? How much do I have to explain the cancer diagnosis? Like,
Yes.
some people even being like, I don't want to start crying when I'm talking to
Right.
somebody. And I'm just curious, when you have people, that something like cancer is going on or has happened, what's the guidance about how to approach that, whether it be on a resume or in an interview or even in an informational interview?
Okay. So what I would say is this: in the last decade, the game has changed in terms of gaps between the Great Recession, when people were out for sometimes 99 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
the pandemic, when people were laid off, sometimes for a year or two, honestly. I think the shame, if there is such a thing, around unemployment is really passe. I don't think there's a judgment. There's too much that has happened. Everybody's been there,
Mm-hmm.
seriously. I don't think the stigma's what it used to be. There's too much that's happened beyond our control. Honestly, CTC's average client is 46 years of age and they've been out of work 6 months before they come to us.
Hmm.
You're in very good company. And these are
Yeah.
not folks that necessarily had any diagnosis. They were, reductions in force, other things. So you're in
Yeah.
good company. Again, the pandemic, the great resignation, you still have a subset of people that are long-term unemployed as a consequence of the pandemic, particularly, again, those coming out of industries like travel. And then let's not forget those poor people in mortgages. There was a huge layoff in November, December, as the rates went up. And we still have a lot of those folks, and they're trying to.
Sure. Yeah.
So what I would say in discussing a gap is, first of all, decide what you're comfortable discussing. I think less is more. Let's say you're doing caregiving. LinkedIn now even has the opportunity for you to put in a gap in your work history saying, you know, took a year off to care for an elderly
Hmm.
patient, parent in hospice. So you can, if you're in the case of caregiving, and I've seen people put it on their resume.
Hmm.
So I think that's an approach. But in terms of a cancer diagnosis and maybe being off work as a consequence of treatment or what have you, what we advise clients, and this is a suggestion of our coaches or recruiters, is say, can you tell me about this gap in your work history? I noticed that for about 6 months you weren't working. Well, I took some time off work to deal with a healthcare issue. It's resolved, and I'm now ready to move forward in my career.
Yeah.
Period. Say it with confidence.
Yeah.
And because of HIPAA and I think just general good taste, people are not going to push for that. But you need to be very clear. The issue is resolved and I'm now ready to move forward and I'm looking for my next great opportunity. And this position makes a lot of sense for where I see my career going.
You're kind of pivoting within that conversation.
Yes.
Right? We're acknowledging, but then bringing it back to the reason that I'm here.
Yeah.
And, I think that notion of that kind of short and sweet and
Yes.
having a script around that, for if you've been dealing with a cancer diagnosis, that is the sun around which your world moves
Yes.
for however long you're dealing with that. And so, of course, it is the center. It
Yeah.
can feel like it becomes the center of your universe. But for people, especially if they don't know you, right? You're just applying for a job. They're not assuming that. You're not walking in and they're not looking at that gap and thinking, I wonder if that's because somebody had cancer, right? So, but I
Right.
think because it's so life-changing for people, it
Yes.
can be challenging to step out of that notion of like, they're not thinking about that. They're not probably going to delve into asking you a lot of questions. I mean,
Right.
in part because like there is a limit to legally how much they can be asking questions, right? But
Also
even just as you
vulgar
say,
to probe. It's inappropriate.
yeah,
People
just
just
a
don't do
gauche.
that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
this was with the advice of our recruiter. Some of our coaches that are recruiters, they're like, say it with confidence and pivot.
yeah.
Also for folks that have been in addiction recovery, we give them the same advice. Like we had a client years ago who had to take a year off, went through rehab, relapse, and then finally, stabilized. And rather than going into all of that, he simply said, I had a healthcare issue. It needed to be resolved. I took time off work for my career. It's resolved and I'm ready to move forward. And
Yeah.
the job aligns very well with my goals.
Yeah.
And I can remember this one client was scared, silly to say this. And his coach, Mike, was like, just say it with confidence, practice with me. They did it. He went in the interview and he said, oh my gosh, they did not ask a single.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. And he's like, just like you said, in his universe, this stint in rehab overshadowed everything.
Yeah.
And he had, in his case, he had a lot of shame about it. But the fact that he was able to just sum it up in one sentence with confidence and pivot and move forward. And he ended up getting the job. It was like the first job he interviewed for. It was a job in an investment wealth management that he really wanted, and he got it. And he was like, I can't believe it was this simple when I was so scared this whole time. Because it
Wow.
took a lot to get his courage up to apply for jobs because he was so ashamed of saying this. And we're like, hey, you left your last job voluntarily on good terms. You knew you needed help. You took care of yourself. You're ready. You're stable. You're ready to go back into the workforce. And yeah, I think you have to go in this with confidence and say it like you mean it.
Well, and that notion of, I do think one of the, just to come to the CTCC for a minute, and I want to give you some space here before we end to just talk a little bit more about your services, is the benefit of having that advisor or some of that inside knowledge, right? If you don't work in human resources or you haven't been in a management position where you were the one interviewing people, there's all of this like anxiety of like storytelling we can get involved with, of thinking how other people are viewing the resume, how other people are thinking about what might have happened for me in my life. That what they want to know is, can you do this job? Like,
Yes.
do you have the skills? Is this a good personality fit here? Like, do we vibe with one another? Like,
Exactly.
can you do the things that I'm going to ask you to do? That's what I feel like the focus is more going to be on, not on, you were out of work for 7 months. What was that about?
Yes. And really, you're so right. Interviewing and selecting a candidate comes down to, do we get each other? Are we on the same page? People tend to hire people they like. People tend to hire people they see as highly competent and confident.
Hmm.
So I don't think that gaps are going to be a deal killer. I really don't. It's more about how you carry yourself, how you explain it, and how you can articulate your values and your brand and your skills. Absolutely.
And can I just slow down? Because I've heard you use this term before. When you talk about a person's brand, what does that refer to when you're saying that?
In simpler terms, an elevator pitch.
Why me?
Yes. Who are you? What have you accomplished? What do you have to offer? And what are you looking for? It's a very simple, 3 or 4 word introduction that you can use when you're networking. And when you're interviewing, you can certainly go into a little bit more depth. It's also that positioning statement you'll use on your LinkedIn profile and on your resume. But we like to think of it as, call it a brand statement versus an elevator pitch. Just because I think it's a more accurate representation of what you're trying to do. You're trying to market yourself. You're trying to talk about what's your, like think about a product, like what values and skills are aligned with that particular product.
Yeah.
You're your own chief marketing officer. So you need to be able to articulate, you know, I am a communications professional with a strong background in theater. Most recently, I worked for an off-Broadway theater in New York City, where I managed all their communications, media relations, social media. And I've recently moved to Chicago. I'm doing volunteer work at several local nonprofit theaters. And I'm looking to find a position in a senior communications role at a large theater like the Goodman or the Lyric Opera. Can you think of people who are well connected you could suggest that I talk with?
I want to talk to that person. She seems very well organized.
Yeah. And if you can tell people who you are and what you're looking for, you're making it so much easier for them to help you. Help them help you. That's why
Yeah.
we like people and be able to articulate your accomplishments. This off-Broadway theater I worked for in New York, I was able to get theater critics out to see our avant-garde plays. And I was able to get us our first review in the New York Times in my first year. And we were regularly featured in the Village Voice every time we had a new production. So I was able to get reviews of all 12 of our productions last year. That's a good accomplishment statement.
Yeah. It's a summary that gives people that insight into who you are.
And
Yeah.
gets them thinking, ooh, that's really interesting. Oh, how did you do that? She must have good networking skills. She must be a really great writer. So you get the wheels turning, thinking, oh, this is somebody who I could see really being a great resource to my contact at, Second City or what have you. It
Yeah.
gets wheels turning.
Well, and the fact that it's not going into super detail, right? It's got this like summary quality to it. So I want to ask one more question before we go here. But because I looked at the time and I'm like, how is 45 minutes like so short?
I know. It was great. It was just like very fluid questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So something, and this is less about career transition, but I'm curious to get your weigh in.
Mm-hmm.
And I just recently had this come up actually. Somebody's been on medical leave
Okay.
and I'm going back to work. And I only told the people that I needed to tell.
Yes.
And maybe that was my manager, maybe that was my HR, but I have a team I work with, or I have coworkers, and I really want to keep it to myself. I don't want to be getting involved with answering questions.
Right.
How do I make sure people don't find out? What kind of advice do you give to somebody because I think that could also hold true for like somebody going into a new work environment and making choices about they weren't around when I had cancer. Maybe I don't want them to know. I don't want to get involved in that. So I'm just curious how you suggest people might handle a situation like that.
All right. Well, first of all, I would expect that HR and your manager understand they're bound by HIPAA. So there should be no gossipy chit chat. Realize you're in control. You control the information that you share. I think you need to think about and be prepared to offer some explanation that you're comfortable with your colleagues. Because people are going to be like, oh, Sue, you were gone for the last 2 months. How have you been? What's going on? And then you can decide what you're comfortable sharing. It could be, I had some elder care issues and it was important for me to be there for my parent, and things are now stable and they're fine. Or, I needed some time off to deal with some personal health matters and they're resolved and I'm doing great. And I appreciate your, concern. Thank you.
Yeah.
Again,
Those
less
scripts
is
are
more.
so helpful.
Yes, less is
Those
more.
scripts are so helpful.
Yeah. And just, you just realize you're in control. You can share what you choose and what you choose not to share.
Yeah.
And there
Well,
are places where people are very supportive and share a lot of information. There are others where it's much more cut and dried. And it's important for you to know your comfort level as well as the culture of the organization.
mm-hmm. Well, and I will say that knowing the script, right? I love what you're saying about like go into it ahead of time with an idea of what you want to say.
Yes.
And I always recommend the pivot at the end, because as you said, people do like talking about themselves, right? Like I was out for a personal health issue. I'm doing better now. I'm excited to be back. I'm really excited to hear, how have you been? It's been so long. How have things been around here? How's your grandkid doing? Whatever it is.
Yes.
That basically says, I'm done talking.
Yeah, pivot and distract, right?
Yeah. Which
Absolutely.
I think until you've done it, it's similar to like asking for an informational interview. Until you rip the Band-Aid off and you do it, there can be this anxiety when the actual execution 95% of the time is going to be successful. So,
and you know what you can do? You can practice. Get a friend that you trust or a family member. Practice that. Have them ask you probing questions and practice. Deflecting and repositioning until you feel, okay, I've got this, do one Zoom and practice. I mean, practice makes perfect.
Very
and
true.
Most people are not going to probe deeply. They're going to get it and they're going to move on and respect the boundaries. There will be some people, and you may need to practice on how you're going to deal with further deflection with those individuals.
For sure. So, geez Louise, where'd the time go?
I know.
Can you share with people where they can find out more information about the CTCC, what people can access through the CTCC?
Sure. So our website is https //ctcchicago.org. And what you can do is you'll see join an info session, click on that, and you can sign up for a free information session to learn more about our services. No obligation. You can just see if we align with your needs. At the same time, you can also sign up for free workshops. We offer typically one a year, one a week, and they're a balance between like emotional well-being, wellness, anxiety management and job search, and the mechanics of job search. So you can feel free to attend those, attend our free info session, and learn more about our services. So we are a nonprofit like you all, and we were specifically set up to empower professionals to find meaningful employment. So we offer career coaching and programming on job search best practices. We also pride ourselves in offering a community of support for people who are in career search, job search, or career transition. You're not alone. You are in a community of other job seekers. We have peer support groups, workshops. You get your own coach. You can select your coach. There's a small fee. We keep it low because we realize people are unemployed. We don't have any government funding, which is, the way it is when you deal with mid-career professionals. We are offering a discount of $100 off the membership for folks who are listening to the podcast. And the code is CWC AUG 2023, CWC AUG 2023. And that'll be good through the month of August. And they can also feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to chat with people, answer questions. My email address is JENKE@ctcchicago.org. Yeah, please feel free to reach out. Happy to talk with you and answer questions, help you navigate CTC.
Thank you so much, Anita, for being here and the generosity of your time here and that extension even beyond this, I was going to say hour, 45 minutes, and also the generosity of the organization to offer a discount to our participant community. I really enjoyed speaking
Me too.
with you today.
Look forward to it. And I look forward to working with you all some more in the future.
Yeah.
And, maybe there'll be an opportunity for CTC to offer a workshop, a virtual workshop to your participant community. We can pick a topic, people can join and interact with myself and coaches and get some additional perspectives on the job market. Things are changing so rapidly with the introduction of ChatGPT. So yeah.
We didn't even get to that, right? We need a part 2 to this. We need a part 2.
Exactly. Thank you so much for having
the
Position Center on today. It was a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you.
Anita. Yeah, thank you, Anita. And thank you to those of you who joined us here on Zoom, on Facebook Live, or maybe viewing this on our YouTube channel. I will be back here in September on the 13th for our next staff chat series. You can look at our website for more details about the topic and who my guest will be next month. So again, thanks a lot, Anita, and thanks to everybody else. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.